Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome in to Slaughterhouse Sports, and tonight we're going to try to record a couple videos. First, I'm going to talk about the Oregon Ducks. I mean, one of my favorite programs in all of the world. You know, if I had to think about some of my favorite football programs, it would be Dan Lanning. It would be Oregon. Dan Lanning, his story, how he went. You know, it's been rehashed so many times, but basically the defensive coordinator at Georgia, and, you know, then he had to travel in the middle of the night, you know, after he played D3 football, and they opened up the season against the Idaho Vandals, and Idaho is, I think they're from Moscow, Idaho, not Moscow, Russia, and they're an FCS program. They play at the Kitty Dome, I think, Kimby Dome. It's, you know, it's an exciting place to watch a football game. I just have heard unbelievable things, and I trust the people I've, you know, have said that they've gone to Moscow, Idaho. The fact is that this was a football game late. I think Idaho at one point was down by 3 in the fourth quarter of this game. Listen, I was on the East Coast, didn't really, you know, the game's on like Fox Big Ten Network. You don't even get Big Ten Network, so I was struggling to even find this game. I thought really that Oregon would blow Idaho out for so many reasons. I mean, Oregon's defensive line, you know, Mateo, Blake Purchase, all of these guys, you know, I thought that their defense would play well, and for the most part, their defense did play well. However, I mean, the fact that this was still a football game, I mean, Oregon in this game, I'm going to tell you this, I don't believe that their rushing stats are very good. They only eclipsed on the ground. They rushed the ball 37 times for 107 yards. Only 2.9 yards a carry against the Idaho Vandals. I mean, that is patently absurd. That is ridiculous. So at Autzen Stadium, in the history of Dan Lanning, and Dan Lanning took this program over 2 years ago. And if we look at his record in the regular season, he went 9-3 his first year with a bad loss at Oregon State. He was up big, like probably 21 at Oregon State, and Oregon State came back and won. He almost won 10 games his first year, and then last year they won 11-1 in the regular season, and they made it to a championship game against Washington. So they were 11-1, and if they got 3 yards, they were going to have a perfect regular season. Let's just read the brilliance of last season, because I don't think that this can go understated how brilliant last season was. It was vintage Bama. It was current Georgia. It was Nebraska-like. Like Washington would play like Arizona and win by like 7. Or Washington would play Arizona State and play like hot garbage last year and would barely survive. But when Washington State played in Las Vegas, they got up to a 20-3 lead. They played loose, and they won the line of scrimmage. And against, you know, Oregon, when they hosted Oregon at home, you know, Oregon was 3 yards away from beating them. And then Oregon was one play away from beating them. If they got an interception there, if they stopped Michael Penix from scoring or got a turnover, they would have won that game. If Dan Lanning kicks a field goal in the first half, that game is very different there at the end of that game. The first game was much closer. But enough harping about the one freaking loss of last year. Last year, myself being a football fan, being a Dan Lanning fan, again, like with Oregon, with Justin Herbert, I'm not a lifelong Oregon fan. Dan Lanning, one of my favorite coaches, though. He's just uber-focused, forward-thinking, very motivational. You know, when he talks about, you know, F everybody but you kind of mentality. Game isn't played on grass. It's played in game isn't played on Hollywood. It's played on grass. You know, I'm not leaving Eugene. The grass is damn green in Eugene. The million mile march about getting better each and every day, and just you against you, and you have to go to the doctor on Monday. I mean, all those, you can scoff at that kind of talk all you want, but that is what made Oregon unbelievable. So Oregon, against a like-minded team, against Portland State, they won 81-7, okay? Then they went to Lubbock, and I got to say, so during early season games, against air raid opponents on the road, that is where Oregon has struggled. So against Washington State, one of the best Bo Nix and Dan Lanning wins was against Washington State. You know, when they needed, I think it was Franklin hauled in a touchdown on 4th down. Bucky Irving helped propel them to a win, and then they got an interception on Cam Ward and returned a pick 6. Basically, they won a last-second victory on 4th down. That, the Holiday Bowl against North Carolina, but this game against Texas Tech, again, Franklin had a huge catch late in this game. They win it 38-30 on a late interception again. Then they play Hawaii at home. They blow them out by 45, 55-10. And Hawaii, I think Hawaii would beat Idaho. Hawaii is a better program. In fact, Hawaii is in the WAC. They are an FBS program. They would likely beat Idaho by about 3 touchdowns. Okay, so but Oregon scores 55. Oregon against Portland State at home, 81-7. Now Oregon against Shedeur Sanders and an FBS opponent, an in-conference opponent in Colorado. They win 42-6. They go to Stanford. You know what they do? They win 42-6 in 2 consecutive weeks, which is in conference play, which is unbelievable. Okay? Then they lose to Washington, and then at home against Washington State, they still win by 2 touchdowns, 38-24. Okay? By the way, they go to Utah last year. They win that game. You could say Cam Rising was hurt. They win that game 35-6. So in 3 conference games, they win 42-6, 42-6, 35-6. They host Cal. They score 63 points. Win 63-19. What is that? A 34-point victory? Incredible. USC, that's bullcrap that game was even that close. They win that game they were up by double digits, some BS garbage time touchdown at the end of that game. They go to Arizona State. Again, Arizona State's pretty good this year. 49-13, and then against Oregon State, 31-7. So Idaho scores 7 more points, and Oregon is a miracle that they score 20 points. So this is 1,000,000% not Oregon football. This isn't Dan Lanning. I mean, Dan Lanning, the first couple of years, even against UCLA, the team would ball out. You know, the team was really good. They were really buttoned up. They were really efficient, highly efficient. And there's a couple of theories now, and this is not what I anticipated. There's a couple of theories why Oregon is not the same. So I guess this is kind of the climax portion of the video is why isn't Oregon the same Oregon, right? So one, to be an elite football program is very, very hard to do. And being elite means that you, against lesser opponents, you absolutely humiliate them, and you do it on a consistent basis. You're consistently great. That's what being elite is to me. So what entities are not here that were there last year? And it's Bo Nix. It's number 10 Bo Nix. And I can argue that Bo Nix, I mean, Marcus Mariota won the Heisman, but Bo Nix is up there in terms of his efficiency. His completion percentage is the best in college football history. Now, Marcus got to a championship game. Marcus won a Pac-12 championship, a playoff game, a Rose Bowl championship, and Marcus won the Heisman. So Mariota is still better than Bo Nix at Oregon, but Bo Nix might even be second on that list. I mean, you have to go back to Akili Smith or Joey Harrington, Kellen Clemens. I mean, there's been really good quarterback at Oregon. I'm sure you guys can go back, but he's one of the better Oregon players in history, maybe even a top 15, top 10 Oregon player in history. Then you have Troy Franklin, really impeccable number 1 receiver. But you look at the receivers on this team, Evan Stewart, very highly acclaimed, highly rated receiver. Tez Johnson, another year in the system. Ferguson. So very good pass catchers. I think Gary Bryant, Trayshawn Holden. There's really good receivers on this team. Kyler Casper is going to be a guy that's a talented 4-star recruit, 6'3" receiver. Jerion Dickey is somebody that should be developed. He is a high 4-star player that was, even though he got hurt his freshman year. So this is what I wanted to say. So Bo Nix, he could have been like Drew Brees at college. He could have masked a lot of deficiencies. And you're looking at how great a quarterback can make a coach. And, at Clemson, when they had great quarterbacks, whether it was Deshaun, whether it was Trevor Lawrence, they won. When you have a great quarterback, again, your program gets boosted up tenfold when you get that position correct. And you do it over time, unless you have unbelievable defense, unless you're, the one of one. So Bo leaves, and that could end up and that could end up really hurting. And Dillon Gabriel looks like a fine college quarterback, but he doesn't throw the ball deep downfield. He's not at Oklahoma he did that, but he didn't show an ability to do that in this game. Offensive line somehow not the same. Powers Johnson is a big hole to fill on this offensive line. So you're really and then Bucky Irving. You're really missing the guys from last year. So Bucky was a fantastic running back. Bucky was kind of the heart and soul of your offense. And you were a physical football team last year. And last year, you got pummeled by Georgia. You lost at home to Washington. And then at Oregon State, it was embarrassing how they ran the ball down your throat in the second half. So Oregon was really, really motivated. And then last year, they killed basically every single football team. And then even against Washington in the Pac-12 championship game, they had a really good second half. And they really made it a game in that fourth quarter. I think Oregon was actually up in the second half. So Oregon literally was margins away from being perfect, and the team they played was a team that destroyed Texas. Texas was lucky to be in that football game against Washington. Washington was an awesome team. You have Penix, you have Roma Dunze. Their team was ridiculous too. So it was a clash of titans both times. So Oregon this year, Dan Lanning, the consistency of Lanning through 2 years. He lost 3 games his first year, and then he only lost 1 regular season game and then 1 playoff game. Dan Lanning is somehow like a ridiculous 25 and 4 as a coach. Winning percentage out the wazoo. And I just fought Tosh Lapoy, Dan Lanning. I just assumed that it was rinse and repeat. I thought that they were there. I was ready for this program. I was ready to turn on the game and watch them roll again. I thought that, listen, Bo Nix is a good quarterback, but when he came from Auburn, he wasn't the same elite quarterback. And I'm thinking Dillon Gabriel, UCF, and then Oklahoma. I remember him against Texas. I remember him playing pretty good. And I'm thinking, wow, Oregon is going to do some things. But here I think is the problem. There's a couple of problems with Oregon. I think that Will Stein could end up being a problem or a weak point. And it hurts me to say that because he's a very nice guy. But it's possible that Bo Nix kind of rose his stock. Okay, same with, because Bo Nix was played at a Hall of Fame college football level last year. He was like an expert. He was a 5th-year graduate student. He was a doctor of football at the college level. And he had a lot of input on that offense. And Will Stein, when he came over from Texas, San Antonio, was really unknown. So how much of last year, I'm going to give Will Stein credit for last year. But now you have a decent quarterback in Dillon Gabriel. You need to develop a quarterback in Dante Moore. Bo Nix with Kenny Dillingham shined, and then Bo Nix, would call up Will Stein all the time, and Bo Nix has a great amount of influence in that offense. So now Will Stein without Bo Nix, through game 1, there are question marks with the offensive staff because Will Stein was, again, he's only been a solo offensive coordinator for a short amount of time. He's still young. He aced the first year, but there's not a track record of unbelievable coordinating. It's not like you're looking at a Bobby Petrino or a Lane Kiffin or somebody with an incredible track record, or Dan Mullen or Urban Meyer, a track record of brilliance over time. So Will Stein is a big question mark. The offensive line and the offensive line coach, I mean, I think Clem is gone. Clem left a year ago. Alec Terry is now the offensive line coach. And Oregon is just, I think that in the offseason, I think that they didn't practice very hard. Because they're so focused on 17 games and staying well rested for 17. They totally overlooked Idaho, but they also naturally, human nature took over. And with everybody in Oregon, whether it's Dan Lanning, whether it's everybody, thinking that, okay, look at last year, look at the last couple of years. Year one, we only lost 3 games. Again, one was against Georgia, who won a national championship. The other 2 were actually really competitive. We could have even won 11-1 if a couple plays went different. And then the following year is one of the most dominant 11-1 seasons that you're going to see in college football history. But now the game against Idaho is so concerning. There's so many question marks I now have for this team. Is Dylan Gabriel going to be the right quarterback for this football team? Is this offensive line now with a right guard in Bedford missing? Is this offensive line just going to be so flat average? Is Oregon not physical enough? Can you build a West Coast power football team? Without Matt Leinart, without Reggie Bush, can you build like a dynasty out on the West Coast in the current landscape of college football? I still think you can do it. But it's going to take excellent, offensive. It's going to take excellent insight into building an offensive line. Our practice is too soft. Again, I think that the team is totally complacent. I mean, they're picked to win the national championship by so many. And I was, from a commentator's point of view, I'm not going to come here and say I expected Oregon to be in a fight with the Idaho Vandals. I think that would be absolutely crazy. I think I probably would have picked Oregon to cover that game last week. So it is one game. Maybe this will sound stupid when we look back on it. I'm rooting for Will Stein to be great. I think Will Stein, again, is still kind of learning, which is totally fine. I guess you're always learning, but again, he's still very inexperienced, so his best football is yet to be called. Looking at Oregon, can they run the ball? Do they have the pieces to do it? Listen, if they lose a couple of games, then you throw in Dante Moore, and then because I think the defensive line has very good underclassmen players. The defensive line, I think, is going to be healthy and stacked. I think the corners are even going to get better and better. They took on a lot of transfer portal guys, even in the back end of their secondary. So you have to develop running back. Really losing Carlos Lachlan. Now that you now I'm just brainstorming here. The fact that you lose Coach Locke, you replace him with Rashad Samples. Rashad Samples is a rising coach, kind of like Stein. But Coach Locke was a veteran. You're just missing a couple of ingredients of kind of toughness. And I mean, Bucky and Coach Lachlan, it's kind of hard to beat. And then Kenny Dillingham not being that first staff, we could look back on that first staff, that they got, and it's insane. It's insane. Matt Pallage leaves from that first year. Kenny was on that staff, and now you look at Arizona State and kind of what they're doing. I think that those are some big losses there when you look at Oregon football. So I think that Bo Nix, I didn't anticipate it being as big of a loss. The offensive line, crazy. But against Boise State, now the public is doubting Oregon. That line went from a 20-point spread, which is really low, to now an 18-point spread against Boise State. And now if you're Penn State, if you're other teams in the Big Ten, they smell blood in the water. And it's going to be interesting when Oregon, if they're going to bring that same level of football, they're going to be playing in some cold environments. Wisconsin, they're going to be playing against Michigan. They're even going to Indiana in October to play Purdue. It is just, it's interesting to kind of see this team this year. And they're going to have to fight, and they're going to have to correct things quickly and get after it physically. And maybe they're not showing everything, but I think that they're going to be the best when they can obviously run the football, and then Dillon can play a complementary style instead of the passing game have to carry your running game, have to carry the entire offense. So we're going to see if this team can get it to you-know-what together. But it's shocking. And I just have a couple of theories now that the dust has settled. I've had time to think about what is different from this Oregon team, and those are the theories that I've kind of come up with so far.